people who try to freeze winners and losers in place don't understand the way that markets work.
Augmented reality to me is just the visual effects pipeline in real time on the phone in your pocket.
You're going to be able to make really watchable and fun films almost exclusively using AI.
People are at the top of the hierarchy. The experts are always the most averse to adopting this tech.
At the bottom of Pandora's box was what? Hey,
you don't even need a fancy computer. Like, you just use compute in the cloud. The phone in your pocket is the movie studio. If the 11, 12-year-old me had access to stuff like this, I'd lose my mind.
And so I look at those things and I'm like, where do I sign up, man? Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with another Infinite Loops. Today, my guest is Bilawal Sidhu, who just honestly freaks me out. You are a one-man corporation, as I said to you before we started creating. Your CD is amazing. You're a creator, an engineer. You worked at Google, and then you decided, you know what? I'm gonna become an entrepreneur, and I'm gonna start playing with AR, VR, AI, and just make kick-ass videos. We chatted about the one that I saw. And if I'm seeing it, man, that is a viral video because I don't have TikTok. And what's even better is I had a bunch of friends send that to me.
That's amazing.
The video that I'm speaking about was the aliens at the Miami Mall. And again, all my friends sent it to me and I was like, this is so cool. And it immediately made me think of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. You familiar with it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because War of the Worlds had a similar effect in the sense that back in the radio days when it would air on radio airwaves, a lot of people assumed it was real and it caused a bit of a mass panic in society.
So I guess that's kind of my first question, because as I was going through your stuff and listening to several of your podcasts and watching your work, are you worried about this? Are you worried about people like normies? So I've been interested in AI for a long, long time and love it. And yet some of my friends who don't know too much about, and fellow olds, by the way, I'm 64. And they're like, this is scary. Do you worry? I'm a big fan of a book called The Fifth Science. And in it, he's got this great quote about narrative collapse. And basically what he says is that when a society gets hyper connected and when the tech gets so good that it's very difficult to distinguish a deep fake from a real video, that all truths sort of collapse into a sameness. What do you think?
I think I am worried about it, but I'm also excited and optimistic about all of this stuff because the fundamental technologies that we're talking about to create and then distribute this content, I think, is dual use, like most other technology. And it is interesting, even if we leave deepfakes and generative AI and sort of the ease of creation that's obviously dropping over time, right? Visual effects, being able to create convincing deepfakes or content that's indistinguishable from reality has historically been the domain of the visual effects houses and eventually the indie visual effects artists. That still required a lot of effort. And now, what even took me otherwise would have taken me like a week or so to make, in the case of this Miami Mall video, I was able to crank out in a couple hours on the weekend. And so obviously that creates on the production side, things are getting easier and easier. But on the distribution side, this trend has been playing out, right? Like the phones in our pocket, the screens that we look at all day are already sort of mediating our perception of reality. They're sort of the windows through which we see the world. And there's, whether it's shallow fakes and misinformation on Facebook and WhatsApp groups, and now this new generation of deep fakes, I think that capability has already been there. But I think at the same time, people are getting more and more aware and sophisticated and sort of cultivating a discerning intellect to be able to tell, or at least stop and assume nah, this looks fake. Are we going to reach a point where you really can't tell what's real or fake and truth loses all meaning? I don't know. I don't think so, but that's certainly something I do worry about.
So I was chairman of Stability AI for a couple of years, and watching it in real time just astounded me. Literally day to day changes that were like exponentially better. And one of the things that we batted around was maybe we should try to do like a prize for deep fake detection software. And if we
Yeah,
got close enough, the idea was we would just release it for free we'd give it to all the news organizations. We'd put it on, GitHub or anywhere anyone could download it. But then it becomes kind of like that arms race. You're young, so you probably don't remember when radar. When cops use radar on your car.
totally. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what happened was it's apocryphal, but it's a great story because there was a little conspiracy. Nothing like today. Back then, there were very few conspiracies, but there was a little conspiracy that it was the same company selling the radar to the cops and the fuzzbusters to the people, and they kept just updating it, right? And so we'd see something similar. So I guess it's with these emerging technologies, it's kind of like fire, right? Fire created our prefrontal cortex. When we started cooking food, that's when we were like, wait, I'm conscious. I can understand the past and future. I can make plans. And we didn't ban fire, even though arguably it's one of the most dangerous technologies, if we're talking about technology in the world. Instead of banning it, right, we created fire departments and fire alarms and fire drills. Do you see that happening with all of the technologies that are emerging today?
I think that's the direction it has to go. You're totally right that it's turned into a game of whack-a-mole, right? Like you create a new discriminator that can tell what's generated, what's not. And then if you open source it, bad actors can use that discriminator to train a new generator to bypass it. And like on that goes, right? So to me, it feels like the analogy that comes to mind is sort of like, and this is perhaps funny to talk about given that we just had this global Microsoft outage over the last couple of days, is it's the new version of sort of like penetration testing and vulnerability management, where we're clearly using software that isn't bulletproof. Best efforts are made to sort of make it rock solid, but there's an expectation that people are going to find a way around that. And we're going to have to keep up. And it's going to be this ongoing, arms race or game of whack-a-mole. And so I think we're seeing that play out. We're already, in common, sort of like the sort of telltale sign du jour for generative AI imagery has historically been, oh my God, like, it has like 5 or 6, it has 6 or 7 fingers, it doesn't get the appendages perfectly right or whatever. Or if you zoom in and look at some of the high frequency detail, you can kind of tell, and that's already outdated, right? You can generate immaculate still images that I think like shatter the visual Turing test completely. And I think we're now on the cusp of video sort of hitting that, that standpoint. And I think like going back to good old fashioned ways of like, are there different like sources that have the same video clip, right? Like, do we have multiple observations of this thing to at least rule out the possibility that, or reduce the probability that this isn't completely faked? And I think people just employing tactics like that, we're seeing that happen, honestly, in the light of this, presidential assassination attempt. So much content circulated, some of which was like weird, shallow fakes that weren't exactly true. And you saw sort of the community, kind of coming up with enough evidence to sort of rule out certain things or discredit certain sources of evidence. And I think that'll keep playing out. And so between efforts that Adobe and companies like it are taking with like the C2PA, sort of this content authenticity initiative of embedding the right sort of metadata, that's like one layer. But on the other hand, I think just public awareness and sort of, I like to say, if you can't solve this at the point of generation, you have to solve this at the point of distribution. And I think the large tech companies that own the distribution platforms right now have all the incentives to solve it. Yet I will say, I see this happening, but it's slower than we expect, right? Because like, again, shallow fakes are still predominantly what proliferate on these platforms. And those are ostensibly easier to find because, you can tell, this exact photo of this politician was actually sourced from this other time and place. Because you've got some way to do a reverse image search because this image was like repurposed. That's obviously harder to do with generative AI, but I think the right incentives are there for these platforms to, kind of at least not let content that is, reaching hundreds of millions of users while being blatantly, fake. I'm sure that'll happen, but I assume that game of whack-a-mole will only get better.
Yeah, I remember way back when they faked a letter about George W. Bush, and the reason it was discovered to be a fake was the community. Literally,
Wow.
in like a day, people were posting on the various platforms of that era. Hey, wait a minute! This letter uses a font that wasn't invented at the date of the letter. Right. And it's like one of the reasons why I'm such a proponent of open source as opposed to closed, because the world's creatives and the world's people like you, like I would certainly love if something showed up and it looked very, very real. Like one of the first places I'd check in now, it would be on your channels to see what you had to say about it. So I think that that's right. I think that this is an emergent phenomenon and that we are really undergoing something I'm incredibly excited by. Let's get that out of the way. I absolutely think that this technology is probably the most powerful technology that's ever been invented during my lifetime. And its uses also are pretty extraordinary, which we'll get into in a minute. But like I don't want to bury the lead here too much. You sort of single-handedly got 360 million views for your art. And I'm calling it art because that's what I really look at it as. Like you're very creative. It's one of your goals. You're obsessed with uniting reality with imagination. One of my obsessions as well.
Cool.
Tell everyone listening or watching, okay, how do I do that too?
Honestly, it's easier than ever before. I like to joke that I got into CG and VFX at an early age at 11. I was making these like dorky flash animations back then, and I happened to see I'd just gotten access to the internet like 2 years before that. And I was able to access all these like websites that showed me 3D Studio Max. And there was this amazing TV show called Mega Movie Magic that was showing the interface for this is back like in the pre-Maya days, all the tools that existed back then. And, some of the earliest alias tools. And I saw holy crap, you can use this computer to create visuals that are indistinguishable from reality that can totally, you can turn your mind inside out and take real world footage and put something fantastical in it. And it feels like it's there. And back then it was holy crap, I had to buy these massive 3ds Max Bible books that had CD-ROMs at the end of it with sample projects. And there was no YouTube and all this other, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to build even baseline expertise to be oh, finally I can make that lightsaber battle with my homies, in the backyard as the clothes are drying on the clothesline there. Or, I can have a spaceship and make it look like, climbing down in reverse from a slide is actually coming down a spaceship. And now it's the phone in your pocket is capable of that and then some. It's it's kind of wild. This is back still in right as digital video is popping off. So it's still in the mini DV era. I started off in the high 8 era. And then, I was still digitizing cassettes, right? With FireWire cables. And so now you got a 4K camera in your pocket, sometimes 8K, especially if you have an Android these days. It's got a bunch of compute on it. It does computer vision, and augmented and virtual reality, which augmented reality to me is just the visual effects pipeline in real time on the phone in your pocket. So you've got a bunch of apps in your phone that are capable of doing these things, not to mention a myriad of web apps and desktop applications that you can do cool things. So a couple of applications, if you're coming into this, let's say as a complete beginner and you want to do cool things, there's a few things I would recommend. For your video editor, just go CapCut, mobile or desktop, up to you. If you feel a way about ByteDance and the CCP or whatever, maybe go get Descript. That's also a really cool, easy to edit application. And if you really want to get fancy, there's the Adobe tools, DaVinci Resolve, but I'd wait to get there. And then on the visual effects side, I would say like 2 or 3 applications come to mind. One is an app that I've been loving recently called Skyglass VFX. It's this mobile app. It's a bunch of these ex-Apple cats that have basically made a mobile app where you can put yourself in a virtual environment. So if we break down like the whole, landscape of visual effects that you can do to saying like digital characters, we want to have digital characters in the world. Number 2, we want to have digital sets. We want to put real characters in virtual environments. And number 3 being we want to add all miscellaneous other effects, simulations, explosions, all the cool stuff that you want to think about on top of that. Let's put that as the third bucket. For putting yourself into a virtual environment, level 1 is just like use CapCut or TikTok and use the green screen filter. And there's some fun filters in there where you can put a 360 image. So you can like get something from Street View or take a pano or use a bunch of AI generators online to make a 360 pano. And suddenly you can kind of orbit around a virtual environment. Skyglass takes that to the next level where it's like literally pixel streaming Unreal Engine to your phone. So it's using all the AR data off your phone to track you. It'll segment you out or key out your green screen if you've got one. And it'll put you in this virtual environment. And then finally, it'll go a step further to relight you believably. So it looks like you fit in that environment. And at the end of it, you just get the video file that you want, or you could get a couple of layers, like your foreground, background, and the alpha channel that you can toss into a CapCut or Descript-like tool to add more tweaks on top of that. And that tool is just like amazing because it's taking what like Mandalorian and high-end virtual production workflows are doing with Unreal Engine and tracked cameras and letting you do that with the phone in your pocket. And that to me is like absolutely wild. And if I spend a second here just like imagining if the 11, 12-year-old me had access to stuff like this, I'd like lose my mind. So kids don't know how lucky they are these days, or adults that are getting into this stuff.
Yeah, I remember one of the first viral videos way before YouTube was the dancing baby. You remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Or have you seen it?
And I also remember seeing it in Ally McBeal, weirdly, or something like that. Is that true? Or am I misremembering that? Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but I remember when I saw it, I just got ridiculously excited because, at the time I was running an asset management firm and I sold that. And like one of the first verticals that we included in O'Shaughnessy Ventures was infinite films because of all of these technologies. We think that like literally you're going to be able to make really watchable and fun films almost exclusively using AI. Now, I also believe that most of the people who just do that, right, like just have the AI do it, I think most of that's going to suck. I think
100%.
that marrying human creativity with it, the so-called Centaur model, man, human plus machine, that's going to be the big winner here. And like your work demonstrates that beautifully. And so what do you think? Are we heading for a time when, like, for example, you could be just your own production company and like making videos?
I'm of 2 minds about this one. I think this could be a fun discussion because I did read about infinite media and infinite films. And there's this implicit in that is sort of the idea that there's going to be an unlimited amount of content that's created, right? And so, like, let me paint the sort of the bit that I'm excited about and the bit that I'm apprehensive about. What I'm excited about is 100%, like already, like the Skyglass thing I talked about, and layer in something like Wonder Dynamics, what lets you do the inverse of that to swap out real humans with a CG character, right? A controllable CG character. And then you've got a bunch of AI video tools that you can use to do other cool things, right? That stuff was things that would have been like James Cameron's wet dream in 2009. And that is like ubiquitously available now for like a very cheap monthly subscription to anyone with an internet connection, to the point where like you don't even need a fancy computer. Like you just use compute in the cloud, right? And so I think we are already seeing this trend play out where it was sort of like, let's say the first wave of democratization was YouTube, where a percent of the monthly active users on YouTube were actually creating content. And they're learning these tools like nonlinear editing tools like Adobe Premiere, After Effects, learning DSLRs, learning lighting, packaging, all these other skills that you need, and making some very cool things. And perhaps Mr. Beast is sort of like the highest exemplification of that wave. And then you've got the, kind of like the TikTokification that's happening, where it's like, oh, you don't need any of that. The phone in your pocket is the movie studio. You can do it all on your phone. And so instead of like a percent of your monthly actives, you've got 15, 20, 30, 40% of people are creating content. Not to mention the shift that we've seen in distribution. And I do want to talk about this in terms of both creation and distribution, because you have to look at those things together, in the sense that you could be a no-name account, have 1,000 followers on Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, or TikTok, and suddenly gain viral success, right? And you did it all with your phone in this hokey fashion. And, I see some kids these days that are like screen recording things in one app, and then they save it to their camera roll and they take it to another app. And I'm like, I just sound like a cranky person. I'm like, what about generational loss and the compression? They just look at me like, what the freak's wrong with you? Like, look at how many views my videos are getting. Like, nobody cares about some compression artifacts, you millennial. So like this democratization from YouTube to TikTok's been happening. But what also happened with TikTok is like more people could create because it was easier, and the blank canvas problem was solved, where you're not thinking about the 10, 15-minute video to make. There's a theme that people jump on. And you're kind of seeing that play out now with the third wave, which I'd call this generative AI wave, which is supercharging like the YouTube world. It's supercharging the small short form video world. And it is certainly supercharging the OTT, the Netflix, like the traditional studio and the new streaming studio models too. And all this to say, with each of those jumps, distribution becomes more, and breaking through the noise becomes more and more challenging too, because there's just more content being generated. So I definitely think more content will be made that wouldn't have been otherwise, that would have never been greenlit. All sorts of content too, like, passive video content, interactive video stuff, like gaming experiences, all of these pseudo interactive things, like, wrap an NPC in some sort of a narrative experience and turn that into something cool. The spectrum from passive to interactive, a bunch of cool things are going to happen. But on the other hand, I worry that, are we creating an exhausting treadmill of our own design? Because the way generative AI is manifesting into creators' workflows right now is ideation and repurposing of content. I would say at the top of the funnel, what do you end up making? And at the end of your creation funnel, how do you distribute this for max impact everywhere, right? And so I do worry about this thing where, and I'll talk about it from the indie creator standpoint, and then even the OTT YouTube standpoint. On the indie creator standpoint, oh, like so-and-so is putting out like 10 videos a week. Holy crap, I need to do 15. Let me figure out how to use AI to do 15 a week. And then it becomes this weird arms race of like trying to put out more and more content. And we're sort of losing sight of what got us into creation in the first place, because what one would think would happen is more of a Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week type story, where like, oh yes, let's automate everything and spend our time doing the really creative tasks. But how it's playing out right now is this more volume game. And that's maybe playing to the distribution algorithms, right? You want to have more at-bats, so you're putting out more content. You don't know what's going to go viral on this sort of interest-based graph. On the OTT and YouTube end, there's also interesting things playing out. And a lot of that manifested in the tension with the writer's strike, that happened recently, especially around generative AI. But really, that started off with the change in business model that's happened there, right? Like, if you were a writer on Seinfeld back in the day, you're probably getting residuals for like months and years to come as your content was syndicated in other geographies and whatnot. And now with OTTs like Netflix and Apple, Plus moving towards this sort of cost plus model, as it's called, where here's a flat fee, we're going to pay you $1 million, you made this is our content, then the platform gets to milk it. What you're seeing is like even a downward pressure on those budgets, right? Where on the YouTube side, you've got Mr. Beast increasing his budgets, creating like, content that's like rivaling a Netflix show, especially if you take like the Squid Games example, which apparently Netflix had the chance to sponsor and decided to pass on. And then obviously that thing totally blew up on YouTube and has really high quality visual effects, by the way, like virtual production, Unreal Engine, virtual sets, and all this cool stuff. what's Netflix going to do when 25% of people's time on a TV even, which is the recent Nielsen numbers, is spent watching YouTube, and that's all UGC. If Mr. Beast goes out, 10 more will jump in, playing out that hunger game of more volume. And so like in response, it seems what the OTTs are doing is they're like, holy crap, we can't like take too many huge swings on like crazy tentpole pieces of content that cost 15, 20, $50 million. Let's push that money further and do a bunch of $800K or $1 million like, pieces of content, but basically greenlight a more diverse slate, globally, so that there's greater chances of some sort of crossover hit happening and hitting a bunch of demographics. And so I think like that pressure, it makes me worried about sort of like this race to the bottom that's effectively happening. And so, yeah, that's like, I'm on one hand, to summarize, I'm excited. I think this is like a kid in a basement is going to be able to do that stuff that like Hollywood directors only dreamt of. On the other hand, I think it's going to turn into this sort of, insane, exhausting treadmill, perhaps of our own creation, where we're just trying to crank out such an insane amount of content to break through the noise that I think that's the only outcome I see happening, unless, I don't know, distribution like is drastically reimagined in this world of plenty.
Yeah, we have very similar views on that. Part of our thesis is that as this tsunami of AI generated content comes, the idea that having good taste, that's a very difficult word to define, of course. It's like the Supreme Court justice, right? When they were trying a case on pornography, he said, well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
100%. Yeah. I'm familiar with that line. It's perfectly said.
Good taste and curation. We think that what's happening now will lead to the emergence of competing platforms that are competing on good taste and good curation. And that those will be distinguishing factors as distribution models. Now, it's not going to replace YouTube. It's not going to replace the streamers. But I definitely think, again, with the advancement of the technology itself, those kinds of platforms will become not trivially easy, but easy if you've got adequate funding, right? And so we are doing a lot of analysis of the various business models that make the most sense with those as our parts of our hypothesis. And I think that in many ways, it's kind of we're Occam's razoring it. In other words, yeah, all of this is going on over here. What's the simplest solution that might emerge from this? And that can take many different paths. It doesn't have to be an actual platform. It could be a channel on YouTube. It could be any of those things. So it could get out.
That's interesting.
It could get out into the distribution network effectively, as long as you're willing to understand, the impact of it over here, et cetera. But I definitely share your concern that with the ease with many of these innovations allow, like literally the race to the bottom is going to be really wild. And I think for what cultural change is really interesting to me because it's sped up. There's no question about that. Like all of my life, I was an early adopter. I was on like one of the first internet. Didn't even call it the internet then. They were all walled gardens, right? So CompuServe, and you had it was a real prestige thing. You didn't go by Jim O'Shaughnessy, right? You went by a number. And the big prestige thing was it had, I can't remember, 6 digits, a comma, and that if you had a 2-digit number, man, you were the
real OG.
You're the real OG, and I was so proud of that, right?
That's awesome.
So, but the fact is that I definitely think we don't live in a static world. We live in a very dynamic world, and when there are opportunities as well as profits available in the sector, capitalism finds a way, right? All movements kind of start out as passions or whatever, they quickly turn into businesses and then often descend into being rackets, right? And
it's cyclical, it's a cycle and then it starts all over.
it truly is. Do you think that there will be some kind of, let's talk a little bit more about long form. Do you think that there will be some breakthrough film, piece of art, etc., that uses all of these incredible technologies and also is like an amazing movie?
100%. I think it's a question of not if, but when, right? And we could get into sort of the technical limitations of the tools to kind of get there. But honestly, even before that, if I may just like slightly react to the point you brought up previously, if that's all right.
Sure.
It's interesting what you're saying about sort of, it's not clear on the distribution side, the layer of abstraction that'll make most sense to find, to kind of make sense of like distill down, find the signal in an ocean of noise. Is it going to be islands of craters that a la the channel, like the equivalent of going to Marquez Brownlee, like that's my favorite tech, kind of consumer tech person. And so if I go, like, if like Marquez has a take on, I'll go watch that. And so that becomes the filter through which I make sense of consumer tech noise, or new platforms. And I keep wondering, and this relates to your video question, which is like, in the future, how is user behavior and preferences going to shift? Like, and what is going to be the breakup of people putting a huge premium on sort of fully organic human generated content? Is it going to be kind of the split between like buying organic and whole foods, and it's like a small percent of the population pays that premium to have something that's like total farm to table, super organic, authentic, artisanally crafted, etc. And then on the other hand, like most people are totally cool with like Costco, Target, and Mountain Dew straight to the vein, sort of like generated content. And I keep wondering, I keep asking myself what that split is going to be. And I worry the split's actually going to be very much in the favor of sort of this like fast food content, if you will, because that's what short form is, and it works really well. And so in that context, like, I think we're not that far away, and we are seeing examples of short form content that like captures people's imagination, that has a decent story to it. Maybe the highest manifestation of it being like montage sci-fi trailers has become the thing du jour lately. And again, this is cyclical, right? People like, it solves the blank canvas problem for the next set of creators. I'll make a bunch of it. And then everyone's like, if I see one more Wes Anderson theme, blah, blah, blah thing, I'm going to like, people get over it quickly. And so long form, I've seen recently, there was this like Terminator 2 remake. I don't know if you saw this, that was made with a bunch of generative AI tools. It's like a team of like 5 or 6 artists that got together just using all of the commercial and open source tools. And it was really bad, but it was kind of funny. It had moments of it, but it was audacious enough to try and do the full thing. I think the moment these tools allow people to do consistent, to take a snapshot of where we're at right now, we can already do, there's impressive consistency within a generation, whether that's 60 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, but that like cross generation consistency of spaces, places, things, like, consistent entities, if you will, isn't there. I haven't seen anyone crack it. They're brute force ways of doing it, but that needs to be solved. And then the sort of iterative control thing needs to be solved too, which is like, I love everything about this generation except this one thing. Can I change this one thing? Somewhat solved in image. It's kind of trivial to do with a static image, with static, 2D set of pixel. The moment you got like the temporal aspect of video, more complicated. And so all this to say, I think even before these technical, like sort of needs for like fitting into the traditional creative process where I have an idea and I would like to translate this idea into something concrete. Before that's solved, I think we will see somebody who's like very good at co-creating with these models, as I like to call it, which is sort of like, I'm not trying to translate my script into a movie, but I have a loose idea for what I want to do, but I'm open to happy accidents. I'm open to discovering new possibilities and sort of in real time updating your model for what that story ought to be based on where you end up trolloping and, strolling through latent space. And I think from that, you'll see something creative that captures people's imagination, that will be narrative, that won't be an exact, like, waterfall creation, if you will, but will be more of this weird agile co-creation thing. And so, it's like kind of sad that the people that have most of that muscle of like telling good stories are sort of at least publicly averse to talking about it. So you're seeing most of those folks sort of like, use it earlier in their production life cycle to do mood boards and like, explore different concepts before they write the screenplay manually or whatever. But I think as that stigma sort of reduces, we will see some really cool things happening.
Yeah. If you study new technologies from the past and you look at how they were initially adopted, it's really freaky. Because, for example, when they introduced movie cameras, people were like, "Well, I guess we should film plays." That's what they did. They took the camera and filmed a play because that was their context. That's what they, let's do that.
And the closest proxy. Yeah,
exactly. That's a great way of putting it. The closest proxy that they're familiar with, right? Same with, and you also saw exactly the same reticence and pushback from the earlier users of that, right? So, like, for example, when records became popular, symphony orchestras took out full-page ads in big newspapers saying, "This is an abomination. This is not the way you listen to music. You've got to see music live," right? And so you saw that with radio, like that played on the fear of people like radio. There are waves, and like if you go back into the way back machine, you'll see like there were a lot of newspaper stories showing dead birds around radio towers, right? So the thing that you can always, in my opinion, rely on is human OS, human operating system. Doesn't change very often, right? And so if you know that and you study it and you study how new technologies get adopted, that's always part of it, right?
Totally.
I don't know whether you saw the Larry David ad in the Super Bowl where they're bringing him all these different things. We call it the wheel, and then Larry David got that face. It's like, that'll never work. No.
Yeah, totally.
But there is a pattern, if you will,
100%.
to the way human beings respond. And I suspect that one of the things we're trying to do with infinite films and infinite media is make it creative friendly, right? So they can and it's so interesting to watch people. Like I have a lot of creative friends and many of them were like on the phone to me, "This AI stuff is horrible. This is awful. It's just going to ruin everything," right?
Yeah.
And rather than argue with them, I would say, you know what? How about like we had a graphic artist and we have a company called Wand, and we also are venture investors. And I'm like, how'd you like to just iterate on your own work? And they're like, "Oh, I can do that?"
Yeah,
and
totally.
and I'm like, "Yeah, you can. Let me show you this thing." And then just let them do it, right? Don't lecture them. Don't tell, show, right?
100%.
That's a good part of good storytelling as well. And, I got secretly really excited when my wife, the photographer I told you about earlier, who, as you might guess, is not terribly pro AI, despite what her husband does. she finally came in and goes, "Is there a tool that I could just put all of my own work on and see how to get her?" And I'm like, "Yes, of course there is. And I had it waiting for you right here." So I definitely think that's going to be part of this process as it evolves. And cultural evolution is a real thing. It takes a while. It's like the adoption curve of any kind of tech, right?
100%. Yeah.
It takes and you're obviously way over here on the early side.
100%. Yep.
But I do think that ultimately there will be some piece of art, some movie, some story, some series that people are just like, "Holy shit, this is like really good." It is my thesis that will be the tech being used by a really cool, creative human being or group of human beings. And like, I think we also have a publishing division. I think, when you think about TV shows, right? They all have writer rooms. They don't have for the most part, they don't have a single writer. Like The West Wing, I guess, was best when Aaron Sorkin himself was the main writer for it. But like Seinfeld, I love Seinfeld, and it had a big writer's room.
Yeah.
And that's why I also embrace the term you used a moment ago, co-creation. Like, I'm a big believer in co-creation. I think that if Larry David wasn't in that room, Seinfeld would not have been the huge series that it was, right? Like, I love Jerry. You watch him do his stand-up. He's really, really funny. But that show had its bite, and it addressed, like, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything that wasn't addressed first, either by The Simpsons or by Jerry Seinfeld, right? Like you got to put yourself back in the 90s where they were doing really funny things with what at the time were taboo subjects. And a classic Seinfeld episode is where they have the anti-masturbation bet with the group, and the funny gif that people always use is Kramer coming in and slapping his money on the counter and saying, "I'm out," at day one.
Yeah, that's amazing. I need to go down the Seinfeld rabbit hole. Like, a lot of friends have recommended it. I've never gone down.
Oh, I think you'd love it. I think you'd love it because the thing that I find it cool retrospectively is, man, they were taking on everything that was at that point in time considered rather taboo. You can't really talk about breaking new ground. And I think that we're going to see the same thing happening here, just a lot faster.
I agree. I think it's definitely the federation of creatives wielding these tools are going to do something amazing. I think maybe the trendy way or pithy way of putting it is like everyone's waiting for that sort of Toy Story moment for what Toy Story was for like classical computer graphics and 3D animation, where all the Disney sort of like cell shaded, like traditional animators were also like, holy crap, like, you know, like at least let's start doing some hybrid stuff. Let's do the background sets in 3D and then the foreground can be done the old fashioned way and then full CG. And it is totally an adoption curve. I mean, you know, and it's funny how we always have that initial sort of aversion to it. Maybe we should, after this, talk to them, because I'm curious to get your take on sort of the whole like ethics of training data quandary, which seems to be a huge concern. The other one is the seeding control concern, which I think is like a non-issue, because like you've got researchers making breakthroughs, and then you've got creative, you know, like a creation tool builders building creation tools, and both are sort of approaching each other to create the right user experience to empower the creative rather than making them feel like they're being replaced. And I think we've already seen huge strides towards that. And I love the whole control net wave for that, by the way, because it was like way richer than just text. And immediately, like a classical artist could see whether it's their outline scans or their 3D models with a depth map, all that stuff could be used to sort of tame the chaos of AI image generation and kind of guide the generation there. But gosh, I mean, these shifts are so funny. Like, I remember when mini DV, you know, like was a thing, and then digital video became a thing. And like, I remember like George Lucas filmed one of the Star Wars on digital, and everyone was just like up in arms, and CG was used in like the 2000s rendition. Everyone was like, what the hell? Like, you're going away from practical. Like, what are you talking about? And it's funny, that narrative, weirdly, I don't know if you've double clicked on this, seems to live on in a sense where I made this video about Top Gun, where there's like 2,400 visual effects shots in Top Gun. It's nominated for an Academy Award, yet the advertising all is like, oh, nah, it was just all practical, you know, it's just like in jets. It's like, no. Actually, every shot has like 3 CG jets, and there's one real one. And by the way, that 3D jet was like immaculately 3D scanned, and there's like all these other invisible VFX where everything but the actor is replaced. And so I'm like, there's this romanticism for like doing things the old-fashioned way that seems to persist. And you in a way see that playing out with what I would say is like the most vocal community against AI image generation, which is people who are doing sort of digital art essentially with a Wacom tablet in Photoshop, or, you know, an Apple tablet and Procreate. And it's interesting to see that happen, you know. Happens in more innocuous ways too, where you'll, like, I love playing the guitar and everyone's like, oh, a tube amplifier. You'll never get there with solid state. You need to have like, you know, a Marshall or like a Mesa Boogie tune amplifier to really get that down. Like, I don't know. Digital modeling is pretty close. So I'm going to go direct into a computer, not have a room and a cabinet full of amplifiers and piss off my neighbors to record some music.
Yeah, I think that again, that's just another part of human OS. I think that like the governing body in our operating system, if you just look evolutionarily, is fear,
Yeah.
right? Like especially fear of novel things, right?
Yeah.
I always joke that, if we found ourselves, and maybe we will when we're in VR, maybe you and I will be able to stroll around the savannas of Africa
That'd be sick.
back when we humans were just emerging. But the thing is, you and me and everyone, or for the most part, everyone, almost everyone, never be all or nothing. Again, the idea of deterministic thinking is, I think, going to try to keep that flag hoisted, but it's going away in terms of for probabilistic thinking, which is a better way of doing it. But like, if we saw a bush shaking, right? We are the descendants of the humanoids who ran away.
Totally, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that is deep in our genetic structure. And then you see it playing out with all of these new technologies, just like it played out in the past, right? Ooh, what's that? I'm afraid. Douglas Adams, the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I'm a huge fan of his. And I think that if you think about him as a philosopher and not a sci-fi writer, it makes a lot more sense. He had this great quote, which is like, any tech that you came upon when you were a kid is a natural order of things, and it's the way things should be. And he goes, then any tech that emerges past the age of whatever, 40, I can't remember what he said, but is the devil's workshop.
It's the abomination. Yeah, totally.
But I mean, I think that ultimately, like, one of our primary concerns at OSV is we are here for creatives. And what we are trying to do is in no way trying to replace them, trying to, make them work for less, for any of those things. It is to find really, really creative people like you and work together. The whole idea of co-creation. And I think that, for artists, it can be hard, right? Because again, it's something that's very, very consistent. When the Impressionists burst onto the scene, right? That name was given to them as an insult by the by the French Academy. They literally would not let them display their work in the salons of the era, right? And if you go back and you look at what was the dominant art at the time that the Impressionists were beginning to be seen, it was done. It had become so stultified and so just bad. And here come the Impressionists, and everything that involves we humans, right? There was a hierarchy, and the people who ran the French salons at the Art Academy were at the top of it. And they were threatened when they saw this. So literally, they banned them from exhibiting in the fashionable salons. They named them, this work this is not real art. It looks like a child finger painting with just impressions, And so what did they do? They did what creators are doing today. They found different distribution channels. They found different audiences. And the rest is history, right? So I definitely think that we're going to see something similar play out with all of the work of today. And I don't know that there's a formula, right? I don't think there's an algorithm that you can use to say, this one's going to really knock everyone's socks off, right? We're looking, by the way. I would be lying. I would be lying if I told you that we weren't. But what an pattern is?
Mm-hmm.
So an pattern, it's really cool. Howard Bloom is a genius, in my opinion. He's written many books that I have devoured. And one of them posits an pattern, which it's like a primitive in AI models.
Okay.
It is a pattern from which that is very simple, and yet like a Penrose tile, from this very simple pattern, very complex and very
complexity
interesting.
emerges.
complexity emerges, right?
Mm.
And so like one of the things we're doing is hunting for patterns, because like
Yeah.
in literature, right, the hero's journey is a well-known
Yeah.
pattern, right? And it's hard to deny that when you look at the most popular stories, not just movies, but books, and books from 300 years ago, the ones that really clicked with humans were the ones that, for the most part,
Yeah,
followed
totally.
the hero's journey.
The hero with 1,000 faces, right? It's the same story over and over again since time immemorial. There's something interesting about that framework. The fact that it's become this conduit to, I don't know, encode generational knowledge or just stories that are important to the human experience.
And I think that's exactly what it is, right? I think that is the pattern is, do these stories speak to many humans in a
Yeah.
way that it really resonates with them? Now, I don't think that that's going to preclude. Uh, we've gone from a normal distribution pattern, right? A typical Bayesian distribution pattern where everything was aimed at that 68.5% under in the middle, right?
Totally.
And we've gone from that into a world that has a chaotic normal distribution pattern, popularized by Mandelbrot, with a very peaky middle and very long tails. And so I think that there's gold in them, their tails. And
totally.
you'll be able to have a career that is incredibly remunerative, that you love, that you're obsessed with, in areas that under the old distribution and the old aiming at that middle
Totally.
wasn't possible.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it doesn't mean power laws go away. They won't. But there'll just be many different smaller hills, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so I think that there is room for both. And that's one of the things that gets me really excited about all of the various tools and creatives using those tools. They can conquer niches that literally were unconquerable because they wouldn't pay off, right? Now there's so many different ways that people could succeed creatively. And we think, why isn't there room for both of these? One of the things that fascinates me about you is, what's your process for like spotting a trend that attracts you, right? Like, ooh, that's very cool. And then moving from that to one of your finished products. Like,
interesting. Yeah. Like deciding to make something. I mean, I could use the Miami one as a great example.
Please.
It's interesting. So like, I would say the theme for my content is it real? Like, I want to leave people asking that question of, is it real or is it fake? Right. My goal is to blend reality and imagination. And I notice like when things are obviously saturating social media, so a lot of people are talking about a thing. I remember making a previous rendition of this that helped me blow up my TikTok account back when like Raid Area 51 became a meme. I don't know if you remember this.
I do.
So people are like, oh, there's going to be World War III. And by the way, like there's this like Facebook group that's going to show up to a military installation, I guess, try to Naruto run inside the base. And so when I see things like that jumping into like public conversation, public consciousness, and there's, especially with this like Miami Mall thing, people were circulating like the most grainy, insane like helicopter footage and trying to like 30x to be like, look, if you look at those 4 dots, like there's an alien over there. And I'm like, what if there was actually like 10, 12 foot tall aliens? What would that actually look like? Can we visualize that? With the idea being like, obviously it was just so over the top and absurd that most people at Cedar, like, obviously this isn't fake, but like I'll get into this sort of gear where I'm like, there's attention around this topic. I can make a reasonable facsimile representation of what that perceived narrative might actually manifest as. And then I go and create it. And honestly, I try to time box these things. This is what I've always done for my shorts. The reason I love shorts over making long form content personally is because it's the type of thing where over the course of 4-8 hours, maybe 2 days, like Saturday and Sunday, and like 2 4-hour shifts, you can basically go from idea to completion and still have enough time to explore the creative, like, opportunity space of what you're going to make, especially with these AI tools. And so now what I've started doing is, like, previously what I used to do is like do this the old fashioned way, that I'd go capture real footage that was intended for it. Now I can just do it all like in Midjourney, like storyboard it out and throw it into like Runway, Pika, or Luma, or whatever the best image to video thing du jour is, and then finally bring it back into After Effects to make something fun with it. And then the way I add this final layer of believability and anchoring in it is definitely the audio. I think makes a huge difference for these type of things. And adding that very subtle signature, kind of like a little bit of handheld camera shake, things like almost artificially decimating the video a bit more to make it look more authentic. Put that all together with the helicopter, the sirens, and all of that. It feels anchored and embodied in that event that happened. And then, most people saw it as like, oh yeah, this is funny. This is like if Attack on Titan happened in Miami. And then a bunch of people are like, oh my God, I knew it. It's real. And I'm like, oh, that's where I get a little worried,
Yeah, but that's where you're making precisely the point that I think is important here. And that's where your creativity kicked in, right? And you were able to just go, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, and another one you did that I loved is where you took Tiffany Gomez, the woman on the plane, and you turned her into an alien. But the payoff of that was that motherfucker isn't real. And then you shift to like Scooby-Doo in a bot. Like I can see very easily why that went viral, right? Because like
it's memes. And you know what's also funny about that one is like there's this co-creation aspect with the community too, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, like I mean that I actually picked up the, I won't take credit for the really fun like panning over part. I saw that in another video and I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. And it lines up perfectly with that shot from the latest Scooby-Doo movie where it feels totally embodied in the seat. So I was able to like put those things together, which is sort of like a testament to how awesome remix culture is. And you see that play out every day on YouTube, TikTok, and certainly, Twitter and all these platforms too.
Yeah. So, but again, as somebody who's been around for a long time, remixes are really not all that new, right? Like
amen.
They have been part of art, part of music, part of film, part of everything for a long time. And you mentioned earlier, like, how do I feel about like training the AI models
good segue,
on data? And my view is like, have you ever been to a museum? What do you see? What do you see in museums? You see a ton of art students. What are they doing? They're trying to paint that Rembrandt but in their own way. They're trying to learn. How do they learn? They learn by going to the museum and looking at great artists, right? And so, look, I'm very sensitive to the idea that you should not have the ability to just hijack some other creative's work and present it as your own, right?
Right, yeah.
Like there should be red zones on, okay, this is theft, this is a remix, this is an homage, right? And so, but like you made a remark about like AI, it's trained on us. And so to expect that it's going to be suddenly like incredibly ethical and incredibly fair and all of those things, I don't know. Have you read human history? But I always try to think, what can I root for? It's really easy rooting against things. Doesn't take much intelligence to be. I'm against that. That's bad, right?
Especially against change, to your earlier point of like things that induce uncertainty in people, that just has that sort of, we have this sort of like visceral reaction to it.
No question.
Push back against
and
it.
The illusion of control. If you really want to fuck with a human being, take away their illusion of control. And, why do people get put into solitary confinement? If you know the literature, removing a human being or another animal for that matter from their community is really bad.
Oh, totally.
And there's like two examples, right? They did a study of looking at people who were put in solitary confinement, and many instances, it was as little as 18 hours before they began to hallucinate.
Oh my God.
And why are all those prophets, why do they spend all those 40 days in the desert and start seeing burning bushes? I have an idea.
Yeah, totally.
I have an idea.
There you go. Go deep into meditation in a cave for years. You're going to start having some crazy extra sensory experiences. I'm sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And that doesn't make meditation bad. I think meditation is really, really, I love sensory deprivation tanks. And
yeah, definitely.
But the point is, people, we were talking a little earlier, deterministic versus probabilistic, right? Like things are not yes, no. Things are not 0, 100.
Definitely, yeah.
So we have this deterministic thought pattern that thinks that we are in control, that thus the illusion of control. And it becomes very, very difficult for many people to get out of that box, that thinking box. But, kind of back to the person in solitary, guess what? If you take a rat and you put it in a box, and this is a very famous test, right? One of the drinking things is water. The other one is water laced with cocaine. And if you've got a single rat in that box, guess what he does? He drinks the cocaine. He does the cocaine water until he literally dies.
Oh, but my God. Yeah.
I can't recall the name of the researcher. We'll have it in the show notes.
Yeah.
And we'll include a link to the study. This guy thought, wait a minute. So they tried to prove, look at how addicting this cocaine is. And, this is why we can't allow it anywhere, anytime. And he thought, wait a minute, maybe they've got this wrong. Maybe it's the isolation that is causing this rat to feel like such despair and such depression that, hey, why not do the cocaine? And so what he did was he created rat parks and did the exact same thing. One was just water. One was cocaine laced water. And guess what happened? Where it was a community of rats, not a single rat.
That's amazing.
The use of the cocaine water plunged, right? So I think that if we're mindful about all of these things, that rather than saying, that's bad, let's ban it. No, you can't do that. Let's make math illegal, right? And rather than that, let's be cognizant of these types of occurrences. Let's try to figure out things that can ameliorate them and then kind of move forward. It's like, AI, I know that you have done some, by the way, one of the secondary effects of getting ready for you is I've got to reserve 10 hours of my time to listen to all of your podcasts and stuff because you seem to be interested in exactly the same things I'm interested in. Like AI companions, AI mental therapy.
Totally,
right?
Yeah. That's where my head was going with that example, yeah.
I have that on a use case thing I wrote several years ago, they were on there. And I showed it to some people who were not into AI. And the visceral reaction against was so overwhelming. And I'm like, listen, we're caring for my nearly 98-year-old mother-in-law, and we're very lucky because we get to have her live with us, give her companionship, all that kind of stuff. But there was a period where I was at a rehab place for elderly people. And I got to tell you, man, I do not want that fate because they're alone in their room. They're I'm really not exaggerating when I said I was walking to one room to visit somebody and the cries of, will somebody please come help me? Will somebody, talk to me?
Oh my God, that's heartbreaking.
And one of the nurses said to me that the hottest item on that floor was a radio or a TV. They didn't have enough for everyone. And so my thesis is of course, if you have the ability to take care of an elderly person, then by all means do that. But life isn't perfect. And I tell you, if I couldn't be taking care, for example, of my mother-in-law with my wife, I would want her to have companionship, chat. How cool would it be if she we could animate all of her grandchildren and children, and she could have conversations with them. And then, like, I get it. I get the uncanny valley, right? And like, but they're not real. Okay, the first versions of these might not be that great, but like mental health, I think that a lot of people actually might be better served by AI large language models trained.
Infinite patience.
Exactly. Infinite patience, no judgment.
Yeah.
All of the things that people...
Amazing memory. Yeah.
Amazing. All of those things. And so
Yeah.
I look at those things and I'm like, where do I sign up, man? I mean, like, this just makes a ton of sense to me. And
So-
yet this pushback of no, it has to be a human therapist that, like, and I'm, for those listening, I'm not arguing against human therapists, right? I think here too, this sort of centaur model that's half human, half AI will emerge as kind of revolutionary in mental health discussions and things like that. But I think that this idea that no, it's got to be this or nothing is
never that.
It's never that, right? And so, like, am I just completely off base here, or
No.
what do you think?
I think you're hitting on all the good points. I mean, like, I would say I always view these things as like two possible futures, and it's fun to talk about them as dichotomies and polarities because they frame sort of the contrasting outcomes a bunch. But in reality, it's always a mix of both simultaneously, right? Like, people do good stuff happens, bad stuff happens. Like, people are going to, with the sort of NPCs, being infused with far more intelligence to the point where they're no longer non-playable and they're like super engaging sort of AI characters that you can talk to. I think there's going to be huge benefits to that, right? Like you mentioned, certainly, like, if you're an elderly person and this like chatbot has like all the context of your life, presumably because you have a huge digital footprint, literally you've been creating your digital twin, and it can kind of keep you anchored and tethered in reality and engage with you on the topics that you care about and make you feel heard, listened to. Like, that's amazing. And on the other hand, yeah, there's going to be the whole AI girlfriend, boyfriend, AI relationship craze period. And maybe people are going to use it unhealthy to the point of going back to like a Cartman and the Mountain Dew in the vein analogy of like, the World of Warcraft Cartman episode where his mom's coming in, swapping out the poop tray and like giving him the new, like, whatever Hot Pockets. And here you go. Here's the new, like Amazon Prime just droned in your new Mountain Dew that you just jack straight in. Both will happen, right? But that's just how, like, it's a free country, at least, in the West, like that's how it ought to play out. But it's also binary in other ways people paint it. And you brought up a great example of like, oh, well, like we need to have like real teachers or we need to have like real therapists. And nobody's saying all of these folks need to be replaced. I think people are so quick to fast forward to the replacement scenario. The same thing with creators too. It's like we're all just replaced by digital twins. Hey, maybe that will happen for some long tail of content that maybe should have been automated anyway. But I think like in the scenario of these sort of like one-to-one like human expert, kind of roles that we have, I think you can scale that relationship so much more by having as a teacher. This came up with in an episode with Sal Khan, like, like you've got your infinite always on teaching assistant that's like available for the students when you're not there. So the student's not like bothering you on Sunday, where students that are perhaps, like reaching a different level of proficiency with the curriculum, and maybe you're struggling in other aspects to round that out. So everyone like, completes the curriculum together. And it's the same thing with chatbots where like, talking to Allison Darcy, the Wobot CEO, like it's interesting. We talked to one of their patients too. And this kid's like Gen Z kid basically is like, yo, I can talk to this thing whenever I want. And so if I'm starting my day, it's almost like, I felt like this kid was using it as like positive affirmations during the day. And then sort of like a diary whenever like, stress or anxiety popped up too high. And to be able to do that in the moment you need it the most, I think is just so powerful. And I think that's like, it's a yes and versus an either or. I think you probably still want to go have those calls in person. And that's where it can get interesting. Like I was talking to a CEO of one of these like sort of coaching platforms who will remain unnamed, which is basically like, you're saying that they empowered their coaches with all these like perception capabilities too. So like you're pointed at a person, you could look at like, what is their facial expression? What is the likelihood that they're feeling excited, not excited? And like, it was like Terminator vision for like a coaching call. And it was almost like too much data for them. They were like, holy crap, this is weird. So I think to your point, maybe it'll take a younger generation that is far more acclimatized to these type of capabilities, to sort of start taking advantage of those signals and even include them in practices, right? Because as you mentioned earlier, which I think is such a beautiful, depiction of what always plays out, people are at the top of the hierarchy. The experts are always the most averse to adopting this tech. Like, of course, the Harvard, Stanford MDs that are making like a boatload of money off of like, therapy, let's say in this case, or like, are going to be averse about what, like, some second rung therapist can now augment themselves with AI and offer this thing. It's going to be competitive against mine. But I think we'll see that always play out where the people that are sort of the underdogs or the people that are new to this are far more cool with the tech, right? And so chatbots, I'll end on this, is seeing as like another, like these AI, I've been very fascinated by character.ai, which is obviously created by, some of the founders of the seminal Transformer paper. But like you see this, it's like really popular amongst Gen Z and younger. And you see the Reddit pages about this stuff, and you see like the, in quotes, AI characters or NPCs that folks are authoring. It's amazing. And they're spending millions and millions of there are millions and millions of chats that are created with all of these folks because it's second nature. It feels like duh to them because they're growing up in video games, seeing these NPCs sort of evolve. Whereas for us, it feels like it kind of came out of nowhere and is this like abomination, and we're sort of way more averse to it as this thing. Whereas like, I don't know, this just feels like Siri on steroids. And it's just now Siri has a bunch of different personas, and based on the context, now our AI assistants can be embodied as a talkable, maybe visually embodied agent, maybe then full 3D embodied agent. And, this is a more intuitive way of interfacing with them.
Yeah. And it's one of the things I think I've been lucky in that I've always been incredibly voraciously curious about, I love new tech. I love all kinds of new tech. Now, does all of it work? No, a lot of it doesn't.
Yeah, most of it.
Most of it doesn't, right? And so I ended up running up quite a bill on like, I have the DVD holder with 100. I come and we can watch one of 100 movies, and then streaming. Jim, made a really bad investment with that piece of hardware. But I definitely think that one of the things you need to do to humanize, right? It's like I love techno music, right? And so I can't use that for most members of my generation. But I was listening to this great song, and it's kind of like "Come with Me" and "You'll Never Be Alone," etc. And I had this image for like, how do you humanize? How do you get people to be like really excited about digital twins? Again, well, you got to go to their emotions, right? So what about a 2-minute video that has some kind of really evocative music playing at the same time that starts with, and this is harsh, but like you got to go for those emotions, that starts with a doctor coming out, looking at a pair of parents with the look on his face of, I'm so sorry. And those parents like just breaking down, and then showing what creating a digital twin of that child who had that disease and finding a cure, right? Like 2 different pictures emerge. And to me, you've got to emphasize being 100% cognizant of all of the problems that present themselves, right? Because I'm not going to try to be Panglossian here and say, oh, it's going to solve everything. No, it's going to actually cause a lot of new problems, but better problems, in my opinion. Right. And if you get to choose, do I want to live in a world where my grandchildren's children can stay alive because they had a digital twin and the AI was able to search 100 million vectors and find the 4 that was going to be the right cure for them? Hell yes, I do.
Totally,
right?
Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting because we're in a place where all this data kind of exists, right? We've got these islands of data that are sort of sharded and sitting around, and we're not really even putting it together in interesting ways. So I am very excited about that. I am curious what you think about sort of, this is one of the positions I've evolved a little bit on, because previously I was in the everything's a remix camp, pretty much, which you're describing. And I've had some empathy for independent creators in this, which is the following, that the playbook that, the large tech players are playing out, let's say OpenAI, to pick on them for a second, is sort of like you train on everything, right? You scrape the public web. And there's, of course, this funny euphemism of publicly available data, which is like anything you can access with a browser and internet connection. And of course, it seems like YouTube ain't going to do anything about it, because they're like, wait, it would be hypocritical of us, even though our terms of service let us train. So it's interesting. You got this place where everyone's training on publicly available data. And so that is, in a weird way, like a distillation of all human knowledge and creativity, right? Documented human knowledge and creativity. And it's like, holy crap, in a sense, Web 1.0 and Web 2.0 was like, when you had the ability to sort of like create text and image content, we were creating this digital twin. We were co-creating this digital twin as a hive mind, right? And now from that digital twin, we're, like extracting and distilling intelligence, however you want to frame that. But I think the problem in all of that is the playbook that the OpenAIs of the world are setting is like, well, you go train on everything, you raise a bunch of venture capital, and then you go and like retroactively cut deal with sort of the largest IP holders, the people that have like legal teams that can come after you. And so like, yeah, let's go like get the Atlantic down. Let's go talk to Shutterstock and not like get rid of these like, watermarks in our, DALL-E data set or whatever, and like fix all these things. And that what the people left holding the bag in that world is sort of like the no-name YouTube, insert ArtStation, whatever creator. And that's where I feel like, and I know from technical standpoint, attribution is very challenging. And how can you really tell provenance? Like removing duplicates from Lion 5B itself is like a huge technical undertaking, right? And so, but I can't help but feel some empathy for folks that are like, yeah, that's cool. But like all the journos, maybe with the exception of New York Times, that let's say has enough of a war chest to sue OpenAI, everyone else is sort of taking their pennies on the dollar right now to be like, oh shit, Elvis has left the building, cat's out of the bag. Let's freaking take the money while we can right now, as the sort of ad funded search, kind of traffic model is kind of on a downward trajectory. And yeah, the people that screwed into this are the indie creators. What do you have to say about that? Because like, I have yet to see a business model where people are like, well, we just need to create a new marketplace that remunerates creators, and like, and give them like a fraction of a cent. Like, I haven't seen an economic model that sort of makes sense there. And perhaps it's fitting that even in the video space, which is sort of this higher level of abstraction of creating content, really you can make passive money on YouTube. And maybe to an extent, like Twitter, I'll get like $100 every 2 weeks. I guess that's kind of cool, but that's not a living, right? So how do you feel about that, where sort of the indies are left holding the bag, and the people that have like, that are sort of higher up the hierarchy that you described, that are maybe not on the top of it, but are closer up, are still getting benefits of this transition that's taking place, even though they're criticizing it the most publicly?
Yeah, I have, like you, tremendous empathy with the indie creators, and we have not yet found a business model that works perfectly. It does not stop us from looking, because we think that it is a major thing that needs to be addressed. And like, if we're picking sides here, I'm on the side of that indie creator. And
Cool.
The idea, though, is we tend to, history in the world is a movie. It's not a snapshot, right? So let's not forget that Steve Jobs and Wozniak were in a fucking garage, and look at Apple now. It doesn't mean there were others like IBM, DEC. There were huge companies that controlled computing back then, right?
Totally.
And what were they trying to do? They were doing everything they possibly could to make sure that Apple didn't win.
Totally. Yep.
And it's, Schrumpter, an economist, called it creative destruction. And that's what markets are. Markets are perpetual creative destruction machines.
Totally.
And people who try to freeze winners and losers in place don't understand the way that markets work.
That's called calcification, right? That's going to shatter.
Yes, it's stasis, it's death.
Yeah.
And this idea, and it's also incredibly intellectually arrogant. It's like, no, we know everything there is to know now, and we're freezing it. And these guys at the top are going to stay at the top, and these guys here, no, you can't create, no, you can't innovate, right?
Yeah.
So I always remind people of the idea that the monster companies of today were not monster companies 20 years ago.
Totally, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the idea that the monster companies of 20 years from now are going to be the same companies of today, I don't think so. I wouldn't bet that way, right?
Yeah.
As long as there is a relatively free market, as long as there are relative rules of law in place. And will they get murky, and will they have to be redone? Yes, they will, right? And if you look at laws that were passed in, I don't know, let's make it even kind of current, 1950. What percentage of those laws are antiquated and make no sense and are actually retardants of change?
Totally,
a lot of them. A lot of them. And so I definitely think that, yes, it's a problem, but I am optimistic that the markets will figure out a way to make sure that indie creator ultimately is paid in some form. I don't have that model yet, but it doesn't mean we're not looking for it. Doesn't mean that there won't be a lot of other people that'll finally figure that model out. I mean, I don't know. I've gotten pitched on Ethereum and chain of ownership and Provence and all that kind of stuff. I'm not smart enough to know what the technical difficulties are there, but I definitely think with as many people thinking about it as possible, it will emerge. And interestingly enough, not to just pick on OpenAI, but the big companies, they're not really trying to be your ally here. They're really trying to keep their advantage. By the way, as would I. If I was,
the incentives for them are to do that, right? Yeah,
exactly, right. Yeah. And so my argument is to say there are other incentive structures, and as long as those incentive structures are not thwarted by political capture, regulatory capture, what do you see them all doing right now? They are trying their best to capture the regulators.
Yep.
And again, rather than shake our fingers and say that's bad, that's awful. It's the inevitable outcome. If you're, $1 trillion corporation and want to stay a $1 trillion corporation, of course you're going to try to capture the regulator.
Mobilize your army of lawyers and go do some lobbying. Of course, yeah,
exactly. And look at Napster, right? So Napster came. And it's like people forget Pandora's box, right? They always say, "Well, we're opening Pandora's box." People who don't know the story of Pandora's box don't know that at the bottom of Pandora's box was what? Hope. That was what was at the bottom of Pandora's box. And so the idea, and you saw it in when VHS came out and was really big. The movie industry went batshit crazy trying to suppress it. Where do they make most of their money from? Or not now, but for a long period of time, the movie companies were making all of their money from the video rentals and, and all of that. People don't know that they spent armies of lawyers against those companies. They tried to suppress it every way they could. Same with the music industry. They did everything they could to suppress the new technologies.
I mean, recently an example that came up because his mother had shared it is and I had this post go insanely viral. I think it's actually now my most liked tweet, which is weird because it's a heartfelt piece on Aaron Swartz, who was so crazily prosecuted for, I don't know, scraping JSTOR articles, which just feels innocuous today, given, hey, let's just scrape the public internets and sell it for $20 a month and everything's gravy. It's funny how the Overton window shifts, but every time, you're totally right, there has been that aversion. And it seems especially in the case of creation, empowering more people to do something that previously few people could do, especially when it comes to creative self-expression. I think on net, on balance, that's going to be a disproportionately good thing. There's going to be some of these like misinfo, disinfo thing, and maybe there's like, everyone loves calling it slop these days. There's just all this AI slop that's coming to the internet. But I think we'll like get good at identifying the slop and sort of cutting through the noise, and maybe there will be that cream that rises to the top. To your point, the power laws in these various niches playing out. And so I think regardless of the ethical quandaries, and I'm sure there's solutions there, like somebody said recently to me, John Barron, one of the like nerf folks at Google, was saying like it'd be kind of cool to have like a model that was purely trained on real world imagery, like a generative AI model, just to give the art community a sense of what can these models do if you just image observable things in the real world. And I think we all might be very surprised with how much capability that already infuses in these models, because what we do are sort of like, it's like through the lens of our consciousness and then our, sort of our artistic endeavor, we're sort of filtering reality and remixing it in interesting ways anyway. So I'm excited to see overall where that goes out. But yeah, it's funny to see the incumbents change. It's funny to see the rise of new entrants that are trying to dethrone the incumbents. It's funny to see open source and the folks that are championing it. Obviously, stability huge in the space there, but also Zuck. Imagine Meta would be like the bastion of open source. Like, I did not have that on my bingo card for last year, and it's been really cool to see that play out as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I could not agree more wholeheartedly with more is better. Getting these tools in the hands of as many people as we can, I think is a good thing, because cognitive diversity, it's like you can't make a guy or woman, no matter how smart they are, no matter how creative they are, you can never make them create a list of things that would never occur to them.
Yeah, totally. Right? Exactly.
And so what doesn't occur to me might occur to you. And that's how we build the human colossus. That's how all of, you can say the hive mind. I prefer the metaphor of the human colossus, right?
I like that, yeah.
Like all of us are, and it's emerging already, and then AI is just supercharging it, right?
Yep.
And so you have to have cognitive diversity to make that actually work. Because there is no small cabal of people. Again, the arrogance of it just offends me. There is no cabal of people who know what's best for everyone, right?
Totally, yeah.
And the arrogance of thinking that leads to things like the guy closing the patent office in the late 19th century, because everything's been invented. Right? Like, okay, we're done. That actually happened, right?
That's amazing.
And David Deutsch is one of my favorite thinkers on this, where he's talking about like, what were people saying about the internet and nuclear and quantum physics back in 1900? They weren't saying anything because no one was thinking about those particular things, right?
Yeah.
We fall, again, human OS, right? We fall into this trap of thinking we know everything. And we don't. We're just scratching the surface. Humanity is really young. And like, I just saw a video. The first movie ever taken was Pope of the Catholic Church, right?
Cool.
And the guy was born in 1810. Okay? Okay. To put this into context, my great-grandfather was born in 1835. That's how close.
Not that long ago. Yeah.
No, we are babies. We are babies. And this innovation curve that is kind of going vertical, like, will it cause a lot of chaos and a lot of creative destruction? Yes, it will. Yeah. But I suspect that the more people that have these tools available to them, the more diverse the people who come at the world from different points of view. I'm a big believer, like, India should have their own version of AI. So should Bangladesh.
Oh, sovereign AI?
Yeah, sovereign AI, right? Because like different things are more important to different cultures. Like, okay, like
at
what's
the
wrong
same time,
with that?
isn't it becoming a very tempting form of exerting geopolitical control, right? Like if you own like again, the window through which you see the world, if you can own the window through which you query and generate knowledge, oh my God, that sounds extremely strategically beneficial, right? And so, we'll see maybe like a bipolar, like kind of maybe an oligopoly of like, kind of like models that control the flow of this information, and then like a long tail of open source models. Like, how do you see that playing out? Or is it truly going to be, Singapore is going to have their own sovereign AI thing, and it's going to be just as good as like, I don't know. But maybe Germany decides to take like some forked version of the US one because there's more Venn diagram of overlap, or kind of curious what kind of world do you see there?
Yeah, so I have a long history of being wrong, by the way, so let's get that out there.
So let's go.
But I definitely think, again, that the most utility that a particular type model or particular arrangement yields, that those models usually win, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so will some totalitarian systems use that to crush the people? Yeah, and that really sucks. But do I think that the cognitive diversity of a country that is free, like the United States, do I think that that's the one I'm going to bet on? Yeah, I will definitely bet on that one, right? Because diversity, it's like, for example, what do you do if you're sitting in Beijing and you type in Tiananmen Square? Or you ask their version of ChatGPT, hey, tell me about Tiananmen Square. And it's like, no.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, and you've been flagged. And by the way, somebody's going to come to your door.
Exactly.
And by the way, you're like your rating went down a certain number of points, and now you're going to get a shittier,
your social
rate
credit
on your
score
credit card.
Just went into the basement.
Exactly.
And so again, it's like my point of view is, for the most part, all of these innovations are neutral. They can be used for bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a knife.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Like for cutting
butter or stab somebody.
Or stab somebody, right? And so,
totally.
you forget that it's the way the human uses this particular tool that determines the outcome. Now, I'm very long human creativity, human freedom. There's a guy, Julian Simon, who wrote a book called The Ultimate Resource, and it was human creativity. And he actually did a bet with one of the Club of Rome doomers for back in, I think, 1970, in which the doomer was saying, we're running out of everything. We won't have any of these incredible things. And Julian Simon was like, dude, you are so wrong. You're forgetting about we humans, and we're really good at innovating and figuring shit out. And so they actually did a bet, and Simon let the other guy, Ehrlich, I think his name was, he let him pick the super rare minerals. and the bet was, Simon said, 10 years from now, on an inflation adjusted basis, all of them are going to be cheaper. And this other guy is like, you're out of your mind, man.
Yeah, it's a fixed resource is going to go down. Of course, yeah.
Simon won, right? So this idea of scarcity, it's like humans for most of our history lived in scarcity. And so that's in our programming too. That has conditioned us for millennia. And now we are getting into a situation where digital, at least, abundance is a possibility. And like, I call it the digital divide, right? Like the EU to me seems to be committing suicide. Like, what's going on?
And they're empowering the people at the top of the totem pole, right? Who has the ability to go implement, DMA and GDPR compliance? It's the large tech companies that have huge teams, and it's going to stifle innovation from the startups. That we're seeing the cracks of calcification already in some of these giants, and you're preventing sort of like the natural antibody process, or whatever you want to say, from circulating in the free market, and sort of dethroning and putting a better option forward. It's weird. Yeah,
exactly. And you've got to, that's why, if you understand the underlying architecture of a system, you can make reasonable assumptions about what's going to happen. Right. So back in 1982, I was writing about, and all my friends teased me and said I was a lunatic. but I'm a big journal keeper, and this is the one that actually includes this prediction that I made. This is from 1982, when I was
Nice.
22, and I was writing about the fact that the old Soviet Union had to collapse, and
Yeah.
it had to collapse because the underlying system that maintained it was very fragile, right?
Yeah.
And so like
A lot
people
of people
get
were like, that could never happen. And then it,
bingo,
you're like,
yeah,
oh, you're too idealistic, right? This can never happen.
and
And
then it
then,
happened,
then the rest
right?
is history. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
exactly. Well, I could talk to you for hours. This has been so
Likewise.
much fun. I'm getting the hook from my nanny here. But at the end of all of our podcasts, we ask our guests, we're going to make you the emperor of the world. Except you're not one of those guys who can shut everything down. You can't put it. You can't have one powerful AI that you control and everyone only gets access to that. You can't put anyone in a re-education camp and you can't kill anybody. But what you can do is we're going to hand you a magical microphone and you can speak two things into it. Two things.
Okay.
And you're going to incept the entire population of the world. Everyone is going to wake up the next day with those two things in their minds and one big difference. They're going to say, you know what? Unlike all the other times, I'm actually going to act on these two things. What are you going to incept into the world's population?
One hell of a question. You've certainly eliminated the obvious. My dictatorial tendencies will now need to be suppressed. Just kidding. Let me think about this for a second. So I know what I'm one of them. Probably two. I think one would be to just, if you are afraid of something, just go and try it. I think, as you mentioned, we are very averse to change. We're very averse to uncertainty. And I think especially in this time where the rate of change is only increasing, and every couple of months something new comes out that makes you re-question your fundamental assumptions about the world, stop trying to predict what's going to happen and just go play with this stuff, whether you're a knowledge worker, creative. And the moment you do that, it will stop seeming like this kaiju monster that's going to stop you from the hyperbole that even like creators such as myself perhaps perpetuate, and certainly the media does. And you'll realize it's more like this chaotic golden retriever, I like to joke, that you can like coax into doing cool stuff for you to forward your agenda. So just go play with the tools, especially if you're choosing to like push back against this, maybe go dabble with it first. That would be one thing, especially for the folks that are very, resistant to the changes that are happening. I think the second thing I'd love to change, and this really is like, I feel like we need to have a way for people to actually own their data. We're taking shards and facets of ourselves and putting it into all of these amazing platforms, right? Like Google has a facet of my human activity and my thinking in it. Apple has a huge facet of it, right? Like all these social media platforms have different facets of what I'm doing. Twitter is sort of like my real-time journal. So like, and I wish we could empower users to somehow take the aggregate of their digital twin such that they own it and they can query it and take it with them. I think the technology for that exists. The incentives do not at the moment. And I wish the incentives did. And we could talk about why. We've either got the paid Apple model or we've got the ad-funded model, and nothing else seems to be, lucrative at scale. That's another thing I could change. And if I maybe like the third piece, if I could I know you said only two, but if I drop the first one, the third one I would say to platform creators, especially who own distribution, if they could wake up and realize this exhausting treadmill that's like slowly getting cranked up. It's like boiling the frog. Nobody notices it just yet. I think if they could find a way that like optimizes not for watch time, not for revenue, but some sort of I don't know what the right metric is, but like creator wellness is being a proxy for it, like satisfaction from creation, where you don't feel like you're feeding the beast. The number of journalists I've talked to after breaking some scoop on this podcast, I've talked to a bunch of journos, and they all talk about, oh, well, you know how press is. It's like feeding the beast. I'm like, that's an awful metaphor. And like, why do you have to keep feeding the beast? Can we make this something that's more symbiotic? I think pathfinding and finding that's like model that keeps in mind advertisers, consumers and to creators, with them at the center of this multi-sided marketplace, would be very exciting. And I think the incentive right now is to keep the money printing machine going. And I hope some of these large companies will not be worried about short form video competition or whatever, and actually try to find and experiment to find something that really does, like, that is good for the mental health of creators and consumers alike, whilst giving advertisers what they want. And so those would be my two if I had to refine the third one.
We are very simpatico because I agree with all three of those. On your first one, Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, had a great quote, which is, "The treasure you seek is in the cave you fear to enter."
Oh, yeah, totally. The obstacle is the way, in a way. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, this has been amazingly fun. I was really looking forward to it.
Thank you for having me.
You did not disappoint. Quickly, where can our listeners and viewers find your work and you?
Totally. Yeah. So go to my website, bilawal.in. That's BILAWAL.in. I've got links to all my stuff there. If you're interested in being entertained, check out my TikTok and YouTube channels, BillyFX. And if you're interested in being educated about the cool new research, primitives, creative technology that's coming out there, you can follow me on Twitter/X or LinkedIn. I've also got a newsletter called the Creative Tech Digest. You can check that out as well. And it's all neatly linked on my one-pager website, bilawal.in.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of your time. Learned a lot from you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.